Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're well. Good evening from Texas, I see. Dave, I hope you're well. Thanks for joining us again tonight. Tonight we're going to have a shorter session because only one wine to taste, but a lot to say. So if I bored you to death, just make sure that you scream and tell me why you're bored. I would love to hear it. But most importantly, I want to reach out to all of you and say I definitely hope you're well. And I really hope that, Norman, Oklahoma is back. So thank you for joining. Honestly, guys, it's an interesting wine, an interesting project, and for sure an interesting person that we're going to talk about tonight. It's actually the first time also that I do all this all by myself, so excuse it. There's no kids in the house. There's no, there's no help in the house. The better half is gone. Everybody's gone. So I'm actually enjoying the alone time just with you guys, and we'll make sure to make it something fun. To be honest, today we're going to talk about Michel Rolland, and I think that first we need to talk about the person himself because it is one of the iconic person in the wine industry, probably one of the two most well-known, person in the wine industry, and somebody that I highly respect and actually like quite a bit. He's French. He was born in Bordeaux. His family estate was Montpasteur, and so he grew up in Bordeaux. He's from the beautiful year of 1947. So one of the jokes that I have with him is because of course 1947 is probably one of the greatest vintage in Bordeaux, surprisingly enough, and I'm actually from 1973. So my vintage is really horrible. There's no good wines in 1973 except some in Napa and some in Spain. Vega Sicilia 73 is definitely one of them. But he's from 1947, which is pretty much great everywhere. So I like to joke with him and to tell him that God could not create great winemakers and great vintage at the same time. So that kind of puts him back in perspective. But honestly, it's a guy that started and grew up on the family property and then decided to start consulting, open a lab as well to help people and consult in Bordeaux first, grew his business fairly fast and started coming to Napa about 30 some years ago. He touched everything, every part of the business. He actually touched from the coopers. He was the first guy to actually introduce d'Armajou barrels into the valley. He touched on every single property. I think now he consults for over 150 different properties in the world, in multiple different countries, of course, obviously, and it's a guy that has really grown something fairly big, and I think he was the first to do it. And just like Parker, you can like or not like Parker, you can not respect his taste, or not share his taste. But one thing that you can definitely do is see that they were the first with the most power, with the most impact. And then Michel Rolland was definitely a really big impact, and somebody that really has been quite, you heard the baby just came back home, so I guess I wasn't alone too long. And he didn't come alone, obviously. He's 6 months old. But Michel Rolland is somebody that really opened the consulting world in the wine industry to many. In Napa, he's consulting for honestly many of the greatest. And I'm going to tell him a little bit his story, or tell you guys his story through our story, Michel and I, because I think it kind of tells and explains quite a bit of things. The first thing that I have to say, that he started coming to Napa about 25, 30 years ago or so, and then worked with people like Simi, and now works with everybody from Screaming Eagle to Harlan to Alpha Omega, which I work with him to many different other properties. And so it was really interesting because you know, the first time I actually met him was in 2001. And I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories because I think this really kind of represents what he's about, what we're about. And I think that's really something that is quite special. When I first arrived at Newton Vineyard in August 2001, we were pretty much already starting harvest. You know, you can imagine that August 2001, the Merlot were starting to come in, and I ended up having a tasting with him fairly fast after my arrival because he was coming to blend in, you know, before harvest the previous vintages and make sure everything was in check. And so there goes a big Michel Rolland. So I was fairly impressed, fairly scared in a way. I think quite intimidated for sure, nervous without a doubt. And so we sit in the room, and I don't know what went through my mind. And I have to say that was probably not the smartest, you know, but it ended up not being that bad since we're good friends now. I look at him and I say, don't you think that you and Parker have a tendency of pushing the homogenization of the wine world? And honestly, that was kind of just weird to ask that, especially at the time. It was way before Mondovino, the movie. And we ended up having a 2.5-hour discussion on this topic specifically, where we discussed about the importance of terroir, the importance of the climate, the importance of the vintage, the importance of all these different factors, you know, that he explained, the style of wine, the regions where he produces them and good sold for. But most importantly for me, something that was quite amazing at that time, he said, you know, Jean, I don't make the wine. I have people, winemakers and stuff that make the wine. I come in to help, maybe better the wine, maybe blend the wine to improve the synergy of the blend. And really it was kind of interesting because I'm like, okay, I can understand that, which is fairly humble. That's the first thing. Second thing he told me, he says, I cannot erase the importance of terroir. You know, you can make the wine in certain ways, you can ferment them in a certain ways, you can age them in a certain way, but you're not going to erase the differences of vineyards and terroir. And I think that was really something that was kind of like, wow, that's a second fairly humble but good, you know, grounding type of advice that Michel gave me. Was really kind of, I understand that, I see that. Now I can kind of grasp what the guy is about. We talked and talked and talked, and after, you know, I think it was, 4.5 hours of blending, we said goodbye, and I went on to you know, to focus on my new task and my new job and all of that. But most importantly, then a few years later came a movie called Mondovino, right? That most of you, I'm sure, saw, from Jonathan Nossiter and kind of taking a certain angle of the wine industry. And of course, as people do, you want to create a documentary, a movie or a piece, a journalistic piece that really attracts people, right? That creates buzz. And so I think Mondovino wanted to create buzz, portrayed him in something that I don't really think he is at all, because he's a humble guy. He's a funny guy, most importantly. I actually use a joke on him, and I'll say it in public because I tell him that so often that it's almost funny. I said, very often I say to him, I said, Michel, you really have no talent in winemaking. What makes your success is just your great personality. And of course he has talent in winemaking. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But he gives people the time, the human touch, to listen to even young little punks like me, you know, some attention and respecting, you know, point of views, and it was really amazing to have that. But in the Mondovino, they portray him as that kind of, you know, snob guy that is fairly distant and stuff like that. No, he's actually very close to people. He's actually fairly approachable and always up for new ideas and new challenges. So it was kind of funny because Mondovino kind of we revamped that discussion that I had with him at the time. And of course, because I'm only half stupid, remember I only have 2 brain cells, I kind of went back after the discussion that we had together at Newton before Mondovino and said, how can I doubt what he says, right? Instead of just swallowing everything that the master has said, I'm just going to doubt what he says. And what I decided to do is organize a tasting of, if I remember, 15 wines or something like that, between 10 and 15 wines with different people, regular consumers, some winemakers and stuff like that, and kind of put together a tasting of a very wide panel of people to see. And we had Michel Rolland wine, non-Michel Rolland wine, highly rated wines, non-highly rated wine, and we put that the mix and we made a blind tasting, and nobody on that tasting could find the conductivity to such an opinion, right? And I think it was really, really important because it actually not only showed that I had the right conversation with him and actually ended up believing that conversation and what he told me, but it was kind of almost proven, all the factors that was. Another thing that happened during that tasting that was fairly interesting, because I made that tasting many months later. I think it was a year later or so, or maybe a couple of years, because my son was, Arthur. So it was after post 2004. So a bunch of years later, I decided to organize that tasting. And one of the things that I did was I actually tasted I think he was a few years son, and I would put a little wine on his lip, and he was facing actually towards the audience, towards the other people. And every time I would put a little bit of wine on his lip, that it was one of the Newton wines that we were making together with Michel, my son would actually smile, and I couldn't see it. The people on the other side did. So that's a memory that I will for sure never forget, because that was something that brings me back to my son Arthur, the tallest guy that you saw a couple of times coming and helping me in the tasting. The other thing that Michel and I did together is we work on different projects together. We work at Alpha Omega, of course, together, and I actually asked him when Robin Baggett asked me to come and join Alpha Omega and start Alpha Omega at the very beginning. We had a different consultant, and I had access to Michel, obviously, and so I went to Robin, and a couple of times, and Robin said, "Well, what do you think? If you're so friend with him, what about asking him to come?" And I asked Michel to come and help us at Alpha Omega, and he has been there ever since. And again, why? Because I consult today for so many, different wines, and I make wines as well. And so why have him? Because I define him as a doubter, the guy that will be there to doubt what I do and to give me a really objective opinion. And I think that's really important, to be doubted. I really enjoy working with winemakers and with staff and assistant winemakers, and with people that actually come in and actually do not say yes, but quite the opposite. In business as well as winemaking, I cannot stand anymore yes-sayers, people that just feed you what you want to hear, or because it goes in this direction or that, or yes sure, or kissing the butt of whoever is above them is really not my thing. I've never been like that. And it's really, really important for me. Oh, somebody says hi from Switzerland. He finally goes to bed. Yeah, my dear David, it's late, so you should go to bed indeed. And it's actually the son of my godmother. And I think that in wine, it's even more the case, right? In business, for sure. But in the wine, if you sit with people that always tell you, oh, yes, it's great, you never progress. And as a winemaker, you have one shot per year. Therefore, it's extremely important to constantly doubt what you do and progress. And Michel, we had many, many fights over many, many wines. At Alpha Omega, of course, at Montevero, which in Tuscany, I actually asked him to come there as well, even though I'm already a consultant there, right? So it's a double doubting. I have Mathieu, the winemaker, but I also have Michel that comes and blends and doubts with us. And I think that it's really, really something that I value. I think the closer we are to people, the more we expect them to criticize and not to give us praise. I don't particularly like praise. I think we grow much bigger, much greater when we are doubted, when we're criticized. And I think it's actually an honor to be criticized because it gives us the opportunity to progress when a compliment doesn't. If you taste Michel Rolland wine wherever you are right now tonight, and you tell me, oh, it's absolutely outstanding, there's no, I mean, I'm happy, of course, because I tried to create that dynamic, right? But when I'm actually fashioning the wine, making the wine, blending the wine, I really need opinions that are different. Fred, that you saw from Tolosa, and I are really, really good at that. I mean, I blend together with him. He makes the wine, and we never agree. And it's always kind of pushing the envelope to this. And Michel does that with me at a really, really high level, and I really value that. The guy is a monster wealth of knowledge, has 100 and some clients throughout the world, and you have to understand, because there's only one vegetative cycle per year, his knowledge is exponential, meaning what? That the more he consults, the more he grows, the more he learns faster, the bigger his business model of consultant actually increases. And it's really, really something that I think is absolutely mind-blowing and really smart, because it really helps me, whoever, the client in this case, to be able to actually truly doubt and truly progress. So Michel and I started working at Alpha Omega, I think in 06, maybe, yeah, in 06 right away. And we started making, these wines, and over time at Newton, there's a question. What's the difference, the different roles of a winemaker versus a wine consultant? Well, that's a great question. So when there's two terminology, and I should say that, in a really important way. If a brand hires me and there's not a full team in place, I will be called a winemaker. If a brand has already a team but wants me to target, or help with certain aspects, certain, points, certain direction, then I become a consultant, right? So it's really depending for me much more on if there is a team in place or not. If there's a team in place, you're usually called a consultant because they have a full-time winemaker, like Alpha Omega. Henrik Tolson is now the full-time winemaker after I stepped down. At Montevero, it's Mathieu Tonnet, of course, and Allison at Hill Family. They have their winemaker that kind of takes the wine daily programs and stuff like that, and constantly kind of gives feedback and exchanges with the consultant. And I think that the winemaker sees through the constant day-to-day operation when the consultant comes for targeted visits and specific kind of task almost. It's through a continuity, but it's not as all the time, if you want, as the other. So I hope I answered your question, hopefully somewhat clearly. So Michel came to Alpha Omega and started working with me, and we've known each other for quite a few years, obviously at Newton, and then I brought him also at the same time at Alpha Omega at Montevero. And so I started seeing Michel, on 3 times at Montevero, 3 times at 6, 7, 8 times per year. And over the year, we started, of course, becoming friends. Not only, I think he understood, hopefully what he saw in me was not too bad, and he kind of perceived that. But I have to call him a mentor. I mean, I don't have a choice, to be honest. Yes, Michel Rolland was my mentor. He taught me how to think differently, how to blend differently. He really kind of fashioned a part of my brain that in a different way. So over the years, and with experience growing, of course, he listened more, and it became more a dialogue, right? But between Montevero and Alpha Omega, seeing him so often, and then of course all the private things that we would see, or wine shows, or whatever we would do together on the private thing. The last thing I did privately, he came at home and watched the Super Bowl with me and the baby and my better half, and so you know, it has become a real true friendship. We text each other. He actually knows that I'm here talking about the wine and his wine, because he texted me today. And ultimately, my goal is to actually have him join one of our tasting just for fun with MR. One of the following tasting that we will do. We probably will have to change a little bit the time of it, because in Europe it's fairly late. But I would love to have him on one of these tastings just for fun, and you'll see how a cool, fun, accessible guy he is. And so while our friendship was growing, we decided to one day go to dinner together at Marimoto in Napa, a great sushi place, and we started you know, enjoying wines that we don't make, because we like to really enjoy other wines that we're exposed with. And so we started, you know, that night having great sushis and enjoying life a little bit. And suddenly I, you know, after probably a couple of glasses of wine or so, I started looking at him and said, "Hey, Michel, why don't we make a wine together?" And he looks at me and says, "But we already do, plenty." And I said, no. A wine that when you're really too old to even talk or think, I will be able to drink and remember all the memories. And then, of course, the first thing he said, he insulted me, like he often does, out of friendship. But then he said, "Okay, yeah, let's do it. That's a great idea." And I looked at him and I said, "So, okay, what are we going to call that wine?" And he says, "Well, let's call it with my name. It's going to be easier to sell." I couldn't argue that, because the first vintage of Michel Rolland was actually 2010, right? So I couldn't argue that. So I said, "Okay." And then what do you want to do? And I said, "Well, let's blend some of the great terroirs of Napa Valley." He said, "Okay, deal. Let's start it." And so we started with 200 cases. I think we're at 500 now, or 600 now, roughly. And that's really how that project started. And it is really a project. I did not get paid $1 for that, 1 cent for that. It is really about a project for him, for me, you know, to enjoy the friendship, the legacy of his work and his reputation together, and which is something that is really dear to my heart, because honestly, he has a legacy. And honestly, one of the things that people, and Novino being one of them, but people don't see, of course he has glory. He's the winemaker, the most well-known in the world by a lot, right? Of course he has glory in his life. But what you don't see, and most people don't see, is how much he actually works. This guy is constantly on the move, working, traveling, tasting, dining, constantly. And so much so that I am not sure today, still, that I could withstand his rhythm. And today he's, you know, 1947, you can imagine, make the math, you know, make the math yourself of his age, but he still does it. And every time he does it, it is with a big, ginormous smile, right? So the guy is still today as in love with the product and the people that he works with. Of course, now he has much more the luxury of picking who he wants to work with, right? But he still has all these clients, travels all the time, and is still smiling and loving what he does. And for me, that is mind-blowing to think that a guy like that can still, after 40 years, 50 years, 60 years in the wine business, can still be so in love and passionate about what he does. And that really, quite stunning, to be honest. It's a really, for me, it's a real definition. The only other definition in the passion stand that I have in my lifetime is with Annie Leibovitz. I was taken, Annie Leibovitz took a picture of me and my kids for a bank ad, for a Swiss bank ad, and she was hired and I was selected. I don't know why, who cares? And I really think that one of the moments I will never forget about that, despite the fact that I was, on the opposite and having one of the most famous photographer take pictures of me, was what she told my kids who were there. Because I was supposed to be alone in the ad to start with. And then suddenly they said, you have kids? And I was driving in the car. I took a selfie of my kids and I in the back. And at the time, they right away said, oh, could we have your kids in the picture as well? I said, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm going to talk to their mother to make sure that she's okay with it. And we did that. And at the time, Annie Leibovitz actually took my children and took the time to talk to my children about the fact that despite whatever they want to do in life, they should do it. But they should make sure that they are passionate about whatever they do. And these are the two greatest moments where I really want to consider and to teach it, to transfer this to my children and all the young winemakers and that are younger than me and stuff like that, is really to get that drive of passion. Because Michel Rolland, with his work and the big fat smile he has when he sits down at a tasting, and honestly, tasting with Michel and I, it's not, I mean, we laugh a lot. We focus. When we taste wines, all the different lots, and sometimes we taste 250, samples in a row. And when we taste the wines, we don't talk. But in between, while we wait for people to kind of, do the bench tries and stuff like that, we laugh all the time. And the joy that this person has is really the secret of his craft. It's absolutely, honestly, mind-blowing. I have a question here. How do you give an opinion about a wine when you don't know exactly what it is that you don't like? In other words, you're an amateur. How are you different in style than Michel? In other words, what can we expect from AO with him as the winemaker? Well, Michel has been there forever. So Michel is with me and has been always. So we're both consulting for AO right now. And then the new winemaker is Henrik, who has been working with me for 14 years, both at Newton and AO. So we kind of think alike, right? We kind of, have the same vision. If the question is, how do you differ your winemaking from Michel Rolland's winemaking? Well, I think I love tannins, and I really enjoy structured wine. So I think, and he actually told me that, so I can share it fairly easily. A certain amount of time where he said, be careful with your extraction of tannins, with your amount of tannin, with the power of your wines, and so on and so on. And I think that's probably where we're really different. The other thing, when we started working together at Newton already, Michel and I started barrel fermentation. We started barrel fermentation at Newton. It was already back in 2002 or 1. And it's actually, him that came and says, hey, what about this? And what about if we try that? And kind of, let's see this, what do you think? And we kind of came up with a concept and started there that we applied massively then when we started Alpha Omega. And it was really interesting to see that. Somebody says, be careful who you calling old. We are not too old, you are too young. Well, I'm not that young. I'm 47 soon, sir. Actually 46 until next week when we have a birthday party tasting on April 1st, since it's my birthday. So I'm going to open a couple of surprise bottles for my birthday party. I decided that it'd be fun for me to have all of you guys who wants to join me to celebrate my my birthday on that day. So to come back to the wine, back in 2010, we decided to create that brand, and then comes the design of the brand. And Michel's daughter, Marie, was a designer and trained designer, and he gave her that beautiful label that you see here, you know, to kind of, you know, come up with a concept. I love how simple it is, but there's another reason why I love that, and that label. Because if you look at the font, it's the same font that Roger Federer was wearing when he was with Nike. And it's actually the same font. And I'm Swiss and I'm a tennis player. So I really, really, really love that label, because every single time I look at it, not only I like the simplicity and the elegance, but it reminds me, of course, of Roger Federer, which is not a bad point. Not a bad point. How does Rolland or any wine consultant change their game plan of improving a wine from winery to winery and from wine to wine? Well, I think that the best way to express that is, first, the vineyards are different. And even if you source the same vineyard for different clients, they're usually different clones or different blocks. Then you look at to the DNA of the brand itself, what it represents and what it doesn't. And one of the stories that I wanted to give tonight also with this is, when you start a brand, you can build a personality at any given time. I can build a brand today called Hurricane, you know, and start a brand called Hurricane, probably already is taken, but Hurricane, you know, and the personality of the wine will be dictated by the vineyard for sure, but also by the way you're going to want the structure, the palate to taste and feel like, right? And so I think that it is really, really important to be able to understand that, to understand the vineyard, what it translates, the brand, and its perception. And so you always balance with this. Yes, I'm an Aries, indeed. I think that's fairly obvious, my dear, with my type of personality. But it's really impressive to be able to create brands and kind of use the grapes of the DNA, the location, the soil, and match it with the brand DNA itself. This bottle, if you look at the design of the bottle, it's extremely elegant, but it's fairly powerful, right? And so the wine in there has to be powerful. And so we started playing with pretty powerful blocks, Dr. Crane, Toglon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we decided, because of that, to make a wine that is fairly big, and obviously, you know, Rolland and Michel Rolland is not there in Napa all the time, so I make the wines and we sit together and we blend together. But the type of wine that we make is fairly dictated by the vintage and the site, and I don't think you can really change that. And so when a client's different with the same grape, you adapt. Some clients, I'll give you, to answer better the question, I'll give you an example with Pinot, because it's the easiest way, right? I had clients on Pinot that asked me to make really bold, big, juicy, fruity Pinots, and some clients that give me, really, please give me elegant, subtle, balanced type of Pinots. And so you have to adapt. That's the job of a consultant, is also to read and understand you know, the profile, you know, of what is looking for. So now that I talked so much, any more questions? Don't feel free to ask. These are bottled and packed in three wooden packs, wooden cases. We're tasting 2013. Why 2013? Because I wanted to have a conversation, a debate, an exchange with you guys about something that is fairly funny, because I really, really enjoy that. I think that in 2013 in Napa, there's some people that went too far. That in a very extractable, powerful vintage, people extracted so much that it went sometimes overboard. And I think, and if you, as I told you guys, you always have to read the press, the ratings, the Jeb Dunnock, the Lisa Perotti Brown, Parker, the Wine Spec, the Wine Enthusiasts, the James Sucklings of the world. And you always have to learn something from what they say. You cannot believe in them. You cannot completely, but still, I think you have to listen. You have to doubt yourself, right? And so it was fairly interesting because in 2013, my ratings across the board with all clients were fairly similar, and in some cases, a little bit slightly under 2012, for example. And I think it is because, unlike many others, I decided not to go too overboard, too much in the power, but to mitigate that, right? To make sure that in 2013, where we had so much power, I would keep elegance part of the factor and not go overboard. And I think that's really what happened in this particular one. It is mainly barrel fermented, of course, since it's kind of our tradition. But somebody was asking, my dear friend, who I'm going to join tomorrow for a cyber experience as well, was asking, what is it different between you and Rolland? Well, another thing that is different, he enjoys barrel fermentation where you put the head of the barrel back and rotate the barrel itself to create that extraction, right? I enjoy barrel fermentation standing up with punch downs because I think you regulate extraction more precisely. So again, there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of different things that you can do to a wine and fashion a wine in a different way. But it's really something that is a lot of fun. And especially when you get to these levels of competence and you get the pleasure of working with a guy, that has been doing that for so many years, that has so much knowledge about it and so much, I think experience. I don't know. It's definitely quite amazing. And you see, just tasting this wine right now, it's still fairly muted, right? So if you take the Michel Rolland, aspect of Mondovino that does all the wines the same way, etc., etc. I think it's very different because in this case, for example, it's not as explosive on the nose, which some vintages it has been. Like the first vintage, really big, honestly, almost too big. But we kind of had fun and went a little crazy, which is okay. We can do that, and then that's part of the deal. On 13, I really wanted to tone with him a little bit more elegance, more structure, more balance into these wines, and it worked fairly well. One of the greatest compliments, I have to tell you guys, that I received. And Dany Rolland, Michel Rolland's wife, is listening or she's watching, was the first year of Era. Parker at the time gave us, I don't know, I think 93, right? I was expecting for much more in the Era 2006. And I really enjoyed that profile, and Parker has been giving us really, really great ratings up at Newton. So I was really disappointed. And Dany Rolland actually sent me a note and said, Jean, a few months later, the 2006 is tasting absolutely amazing. And it's not saying that another iconic person, Parker, was wrong. It's just saying that also it gives you a conception of wine can be at different stages as well. And based on the stage where people taste them, it can also regulate the way they rate or you, in your case, enjoy a wine, more than others. So it's really, really important to take that in consideration. And one of the great things that Parker told me after that 2006 tasting, exactly, he says, Jean, it is just my opinion today. Which, there again, it's very humble. He's just saying, it's just my opinion today. I didn't taste it as well. And without saying ratings, because he never communicates ratings before it was published, right? But it was really kind of, okay, shit, excuse my French. But on the other side, damn, the guy that is probably the second guy that is the most well-known is such a humble, down-to-earth guy. And is willing to hear. So it was quite amazing, to be honest. A really, really good experiences. But I'll tell you a lot more experiences throughout these tastings and great moments or not so great moments in my career. I have a few of those. And I hope you'll join me and not be bored to death. All right, is there any questions? Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy, try to weather that media storm that we're having today and these days with this virus, and most importantly, keep hope, and as my motto is, travel less and drink more. Cheers to you guys, and see you very soon.